You know what data is? Data is nothing more than stories which have been compressed and they've been turned into a number. Your job as a speaker, as a presenter, is to turn those numbers back into people. So here's what I want you to do.
Hi guys, welcome to the show where we talk to the people who have followed their passion to achieve great success and have impacted many lives. If you're new here, then please do consider subscribing to this channel by pressing the subscribe button and hitting the bell icon so that you get notification to all my future videos. I'm your host Ajay Mathur, and my guest today is an author, a mentor, an international award-winning keynote speaker who has spoken in all 50 states in the USA plus 25 different countries in the world. He's known as a speaker who entertains, educates, and energizes. He's also been a successful entrepreneur, having co-founded 2 different businesses and generated revenue more than $1 billion. His corporate clientele includes General Motors, PwC, KPMG, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and many more. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man whose speech about listening to your inner voice won him the World Championship of Public Speaking, Ed Tate.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you. Welcome, Ed. Thank you very much for coming in. I'm really excited about this next 1 hour. So once you said in your speech, one of your speeches, that your first 1 minute is very crucial in any conversation. I just wanted to know, how do you make that first 1 minute more effective when you are communicating either one-to-one or in a public speaking kind of environment?
Okay, so let me ask you a couple questions. Let's talk about a speech. Generally speaking, when is a speaker or presenter the most nervous? At the beginning, the middle, or the end of a presentation? Generally speaking, what would you say?
Start, beginning.
At the start, okay? Generally speaking, when is the audience the most skeptical of a speaker? The beginning, the middle, or the end? What would you say?
Beginning.
Beginning, okay. That's a bad combination. Would you agree? The person's the most nervous, the audience is the most skeptical. Yeah. So that first minute is absolutely critical. It sets the foundation, if you will. So there's a couple things that you need to do in that first minute. Number one, you need to break preoccupation. What does that mean? That means to grab and keep the attention of your audience members. And you can do that a variety of ways. You can do that with a story. You can do that with a startling statistic. You can do that with, audience participation and activity, et cetera. There's a whole variety, a gamut of ways that you can do that, but be very, very specific and be very, very deliberate in terms of how you break preoccupation. The next thing you want to do is frame the message. In 1 sentence or less, what is your speech about? So for example, I'm going to be speaking Saturday night in Australia, virtually. And for that particular presentation is how to breathe life into your business presentations. That's my 1 sentence. So I want to be very, very clear about what I'm going to talk about and then jump into the content. So again, break preoccupation, frame the message, 1 sentence or less. If you don't have that 1 sentence about your presentation, you're not clear. You need to go back and do some more homework and then jump into the content. No preamble, no pre-ramble. None of this. I'm happy to be here. Just get on with it. So those things are vital for that first 60 seconds. And if you've planned that first 60 seconds, that audience, which is skeptical, they'll say to themselves, I want to hear more. I want to listen more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so now let's learn a little bit more about you. So you had a very successful entrepreneurial career before you came into the public speaking as a professional speaker. I wanted to know, why did you move from that kind of looks good? You had 2 companies you co-founded, and then you came on to public speaking. What was your why? Why did you come to this?
Okay, I will, since we have time, I will tell you the full-blown story. I am a stutterer. I'm a stammerer, and there's no cure for stammering. And when I was growing up as a kid, children can be the roughest or the toughest or the hardest people on you. And my dad was in the military, so we would move from neighborhood to neighborhood. And within days of moving to a new neighborhood, the kids would find out that Ed's a stammerer and they would make fun of me. So one day we're moving to the big city, we're moving to Chicago, and I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. So in preparation for this move, every day I would read newspapers and magazines out loud in front of a mirror. I also would go to the local park. Kids usually like to play basketball. So I told them, hey, I'll do play-by-play. So I would do play-by-play on the side. I would ask them like who your favorite players are. They would tell me who their favorite players were. And I would literally would do play-by-play announcing on the side of a basketball court. Because when we moved to this new neighborhood, I didn't want the new kids to know that I stammered and I stuttered. And my plan paid off. We moved to the new neighborhood. No kid knew that I stuttered and stammered. In high school, we were one of the first schools in Chicago that had a television studio. So every day I was a news anchor in my high school. I did that for 4 years. When I went to university, I actually got a real job, a paying job, not at a student-run radio station, but a real radio station. I was a disc jockey, and that's how I paid my way through college. So again, these things that I initially did to not be made fun of, a weakness became a strength, if you will. Not knowing that eventually all this background, this history would actually help me win the World Championship of Public Speaking. So I was executive for 17 years in the computer industry. And my mom passed away because of breast cancer. So there was an organization called Susan G. Komen here in the United States. It helps people with breast cancer. And when my mom was dying, I didn't feel that I could do anything. I felt pretty helpless. So I got involved in the organization. I do like a lot of volunteer work with them. And one day they asked me to talk about, my mom passing away. So they asked me to be a guest speaker in front of all these women. So I told a story. It's called "The Gifts My Mother Gave," and it's only a story I tell in front of that audience. I will never tell it in front of any other audience. I will never accept a dime from any organization for that particular speech. But basically, it's a story of how after my mom passed away, I actually got a brand new family, and that was my mom's side of the family. For some reason, there was some type of family feud that was going on. I never met anyone from a mom's side of the family until after she died. So again, the speech was called "The Gifts My Mother Gave." Well, there was a woman in the audience. Her name was Christy Ward. And she walked up to me and she gave me her card. She says, "That was one of the best speeches I've ever heard." And I said, "Well, thank you very much." And she says, "Would you consider working for us?" I says, "Well, what exactly do you do?" And she said, "Well, we hire speakers." And I looked at her and I said, "That's a job? Really?" I could not imagine that being a job. I had never heard of that, and I said, "Are you kidding?" And she said, "No." She says, "We're the largest training company in the United States. It's a company called Career Track. Would you consider working for us?" I said, "Okay, well, how much is the pay?" And she told me, I said, "Oh no, my wife would divorce me right away. I make way more than that, But she intrigued me. So I stayed in contact with her and I stayed in touch with her. So I eventually would leave the computer industry and I actually became the training director for a company called the Denver Rocky Mountain News. Now, for the millennials, a newspaper is how we used to gather information before there was Facebook. So just Google it, okay? Anyway, so then she approaches me again and she said, "Well, what do you think now?" And at this point in time, we had been in touch for about 2 years. And I said, "This sounds really, really interesting." And that was right at the time I won the World Championship of Public Speaking. So right after I won the World Championship of Public Speaking, they hired me to go on tour to do trainings. And then after that, I did that for 18 months and then I started my own business. So the long story is I did this because I didn't want kids to make fun of me. The reason I do it now is because I absolutely love it.
So now that you are a world champion, could you tell us a 2-3 minutes crash course on what should be the key component of a winning, inspiring, motivational speech?
Okay. Oh, wow. Put me on the spot here, right? Number one, there's no one way to win the World Championship of Public Speaking. So let me be clear about that. I think my formula for winning the World Championship of Public Speaking, I'll share with you several of my strategies and my ideas. Number one, if you watch the history of the contest, my speech is one of the few that is one story from start to finish. So that made me different and that made me stand out from all the other contestants. So again, that was my philosophy. That was my strategy. In fact, for those of you who don't know what the World Championship of Public Speaking is, a year-long competition, 6 different rounds, anywhere from 30 to 35,000 contestants. And at the year I competed, I had to give 3 speeches in order to make it through that monolith, if you will. And all three of my speeches are just one story from start to finish. So number one, tell a story. Number two is look for the universal, not the extraordinary, but the ordinary. I feel the best way to connect with audiences is not telling a story about how you went to Mount Everest, but telling a story about, maybe helping your child, or in this, COVID-19, massaging the feet of your spouse. It's those ordinary everyday stories I feel that connect audiences. Scientifically, when you tell a story, here's what happens. There's a story that you're telling, and there's a story that the audience is saying to themselves, hey, that sounds similar to something I've done.
Yeah.
And then the moment that they say, hey, I can relate to that, that's when both stories connect. That's when they touch. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those ordinary, everyday connections. I'm looking for the universal connections. What do I mean by that? It's not dependent upon the USA, that anyone at any time from around the world can relate to these universal human elements. So to me, these are the key elements in terms of having a prize-winning speech.
Right, and the story being the main backbone, I would say, of your speech.
For me, telling a story is because stories are sticky. People love, it's part of our genetic code to listen to stories, regardless of what culture or what generation you're from. Stories are sticky, and people always, it's never happened. Like a child would never say, hey, mommy, daddy, could you please share a PowerPoint presentation with me? That never happens. People are looking for stories.
So how do you use those stories to not just storytelling, but to do some story selling so that you can persuade your audience to let them buy what you're selling, for example?
Story selling is the easiest way to sell. It's the easiest way to influence. So a lot of people are intimidated about selling, or they don't want to be perceived as a salesperson because there's so many different stereotypes out there. But nothing happens until you sell, and your business won't take off unless you learn how to sell. So one of the easiest ways for you to sell is to tell a story that's similar to your prospect. And you say, well, this reminds me of another client who had similar circumstances to you. And this is how they made that choice, and this is how they made that decision, and here are the results that they've got. There's a formula that I use for like story selling, and that is PAR, P-A-R. What's the problem that was faced by someone similar to you? What action did they take, and what results did they achieve? So, here's the problem that they face. Here's the actions they took. They actually, hired me as a coach. And here are the results that they achieved. They achieved, in this case, let's talk about Darren Tate. Darren Tate, 2016 World Champion of Public Speaking. College student hires me, wants to compete in the World Championship of Public Speaking. He takes my all access coaching program. We work together for 5-6 months. And ultimately, he wins the World Championship of Public Speaking. So that's, that's one example. I've actually had 2 people who won the World Championship of Public Speaking by working with me, and both of them are members of my All Access program. So again, that's telling a story. You're just telling the result. By the way, I didn't tell them how, and I didn't mention the price. I just told this is what they did, and these are the results they achieved. So the easiest way for you to sell a product or service, or even yourself, is if right now the global economy is in a recession. Everyone's in a recession. Thousands, if not millions of people have lost their jobs. So that means a lot of people are going to be looking for a job. They're going to be interviewing. Use this PAR formula. This reminds me of a problem I once faced. Here's the actions that I took, and here's the results that were achieved. Using that simple formula, you will be successful.
In most of the business presentation, the speeches or any presentation has a lot of facts in it. Mm-hmm. How do you use your storytelling skill to make those facts more interesting?
Okay, so first of all, facts are abstractions, and abstractions by themselves are not memorable. If you don't believe me, here's what I want you to do. Next time you have a fact-filled presentation, after 30 minutes, I want you to give people a quiz on some of those facts and see if they can remember beyond 3% recall. Yeah. Because numbers by themselves are not memorable, they're abstractions. there's a guy by the name of Dr. Jerome Berner. He's a clinical psychologist, and he's done some research on this. And he says that a fact linked to a story is 22 times more memorable than a fact or a statistic by itself. So if you take a statistic, a number, a data point, and wrap it in a story, it's 22 times more memorable. But Ed, I've got no stories. You know what data is? Data is nothing more than stories which have been compressed and they've been turned into a number. Your job as a speaker, as a presenter, is to turn those numbers back into people. So here's what I want you to do. Look at your data and see if there's a data point that represents the point you're trying to make. You take out that data point, guess what? You tell that story. It's as simple as that. So that's another way of making your data or numbers memorable.
22 times. That's an interesting fact. I will remember that.
Dr. Jerome Berner. He's a clinical psychologist.
Yeah, I'll check that out. Okay, so now you have mastered this skill, and I wanted to know from you that have you ever faced any situation where you kind of close to failing after you have won it? So the expectation from you is that you will be always perfect, isn't it?
Oh, okay. You bring up, there's 2 points there. Number one, there's always, when you're introduced as having won the World Championship of Public Speaking, I mean, the expectations are always high. They're always here. And sometimes, to be honest with you, that's a burden. That's a burden. But have I failed? Absolutely. And I still remember it as if it were yesterday. So 2003, I'm invited to speak in Saudi Arabia. I go, and I'm a little bit nervous. You know, there's a lot of, stereotypes about this culture. So I don't want to, number one, I don't want to embarrass myself. And number two, I don't want to offend anyone. So I do like a lot of homework. I do a lot of research. I read local newspapers. I take out any American idioms or references out of my presentations. And I make sure that it's completely customized. I get standing ovation. It is an absolute hit. They invite me back in 2007. And just before I got in 2007, I'm speaking in Montreal. And my keynote in Montreal, I mean, I just absolutely killed it. I crushed it. So mentally, I've got this, as I'm flying over the Atlantic, I've got this audience in my head from Montreal, plus the audience from 2003 in my head, which has nothing to do with the audience I'm about to speak to, okay? Yeah. And I walked on that stage, and I did not put nearly as much effort and preparation as I did before. My speech was filled with American idioms and American references. 1,000 people, I could tell it was completely flat. There was no response, no reaction, no laughter, nothing. I still remember the beads of sweat falling down my back. For me, it was horrible. So I go to my hotel room, and I've got to speak in front of this audience 3 more times. This is day 1 of the conference. And again, like well over 1,000 people. And so I call up one of my best friends. Her name is Lisa Jo Landsberg. I call her back in the States. I think it's daytime in America, but it's like about 2 o'clock in the morning in Saudi Arabia. And I just rant and rave. And she says to me something very unusual. Now, this is an American idiom. And she says, Ed, you've got like a lot of junk in your trunk. And I'm thinking like, what does that mean? What's it got to do with this conversation? Are we still talking about the same thing? Is this do we have a still good connection on the phone here? And she says, what I mean by that is, she says, your 50% beats most people's 100%. Your presentation probably wasn't nearly as bad as you thought. It just didn't meet your expectations. Mm. I said, wow, okay. So what I did was I stayed up the rest of the night because I had another presentation that following day, and I ripped it apart. And what I did was I said, every part of this presentation has to audition to get back into this speech. And the parts that did not make the cut, I replaced it with new content. Again, I went online. I had like a local Saudi Arabian newspaper, etc. And I included, and I did the same thing I did in 2003. And standing ovation. And I got standing ovations for all the other presentations as well. So it was, that conference was my worst, and it was also my best as well. And so here's a couple lessons. Number one, I have like a silent prayer. It's not a prayer, not in a religious sense. It's more of an affirmation. And I say to myself, I've never given this presentation to this group on this day. Please don't let Ed get in the way of this audience getting the information that they need. There's somebody who's suffering in silence, and they need to hear this message. So don't let me get in the way. So that is an affirmation that I say in front of every single presentation from now on to remind me not to be overconfident.
That has become your ritual now before you go to the stage every time?
Absolutely. So for example, like right now, next week, I am doing, there's a couple world champions. So a guy by the name of Gerald LaCroix is a 2001 world champion, and Mark Brown, who's a 1995 world champion public speaking. We have done a series of what two-day workshops called virtual presentations, how to breathe life into your virtual presentations. And the last two have sold out. This one's about to sell out. I think we've only got like a couple more seats. And we're, again, we're doing the same content. We're doing the same presentation over and over again. But guess what? For this new audience, they've never seen this. They don't know what's going on. So for me, I got to treat that audience like they've never heard this before. Even though there may be a couple stories that I tell that I've told in the previous audiences, they've never heard it before. So I have to deliver it in such a way that like it's fresh for them. I've never given this presentation on this day for this specific audience. And again, that affirmation is a reminder to me. And, and every time, like say, for example, there's some speeches I've given 100, 200 times, and I will say that affirmation to remind me to keep it fresh, because there's somebody here who has never seen me before, and I need to give them my all.
So you also train the business executives, and as far as I've understood that you have trained people from PwC, General Motors, KPMG, Johnson & Johnson's, and many more. Mm-hmm. I want to know, what are the skills that people do struggle with, skills of behavior that people do struggle with in their work and businesses?
Well, just like anybody else, especially when it comes to like the presentation skills. So like I coach presentation skills. I also coach, I also coach people on leadership skills. So let's just, let's keep this the presentation skills. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are what I call device or software dependent. And the first skill that we teach them is how to go unplugged. So for Johnson & Johnson, there's a program called Financial Leadership Development Program. It is for hot shots they've got out of university. These are MBA students, PhD students who've coming from university to work for these large corporations. And the first thing that we do is we take away their devices and we teach them how to present unplugged. Now, for number one, it's funny for us to see people, almost like, drug dealers. So, this is their cocaine, if you will. But we want to teach them that, the first lesson of presenting is you should be able to present unplugged. You should not be software dependent. You should not be device dependent. So corporations, everyone is software dependent. Everyone is device dependent. So that's the first thing that we cure them of. And we show them that they can do this. The other thing that they are dependent upon is data, facts, and statistics, which makes most business presentations incredibly boring. And just unbelievably boring. So the other thing we have to teach them is, yes, you can tell stories. Now, it's not going to be a story like I tell, which is, my stories could be 5, 10, 15 minutes long. Not in the business setting. You can't tell a story that long, but you can tell a 60-second or a 90-second story. So we teach them how to tell these short vignettes to make their presentations interesting. So those are some of the things that, regardless of corporation, or regardless of company, that we work on time and time again.
And you mentioned that they come from premier institutes and have done various degrees such as MBA and whatnot.
Yes.
How do you recommend that we have, how can we include those skills and behaviors in the academic curriculum so that these fears, like fear of public speaking? In my last interview, I was talking to Eric Edmeets, and I mentioned that it is number 2 fear in America, right? The people are fearful of speaking more than the then they are fearful of dying, which is a strange thing, right? So my question to you is how do you recommend that we can include those kind of skills in the academic curriculum so that people don't have this as a fear?
Okay, so the number one fear, or number two fear is not public speaking. The number one fear is public humiliation, is public embarrassment. This is what people truly fear. So a couple ways to avoid that. Number one, there's this organization called Toastmasters. If you haven't heard of it, you should look it up and you should participate, because Toastmasters, even though this is not part of their charter, you're not going to see this on their website, but this is what they do. They're the number one place on earth to help you improve your confidence. They're the number one place on earth to help you improve your confidence. They help you with your public speaking skills as well as your leadership development. And the reason they're able to do that is because people are able to practice in a safe environment. So here's lesson number one. If you want to be better, regardless of your background, academia, business, etc., you need to practice your presentation. A common mistake in business, and again, I used to be guilty of this, is I'm walking down the hallway for a meeting, and the first time I'm and this meeting has been planned for weeks, and I'm literally practicing down the hallway. Oh, I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about this. And that's the first time you actually present your ideas and your concepts. So practicing rehearsal, practicing in a safer environment. Here's something else you can do. One of the fastest ways for you to improve is to watch yourself on video. Now, I know what you're thinking. Number one, I don't like the way I look, or I don't like the way I sound. Okay. Well, here's the deal. Repeat after me. I look like that.
I look like that.
I sound like that.
I sound like that.
Get over it.
Get over it.
Okay. We had to look and listen, so you're going to have to look and listen. All right. You do look like that. You do sound like that. Just get over it. But the fastest way for you to improve is to watch yourself on video. And here's different ways to watch yourself on video. 4 different ways. Number one, don't watch yourself on video. The first recording, just listen to yourself. Listen to what your words are. Can I follow you without seeing you? So that's the first review, if you will. Second review is watch yourself without sound. What we're looking for here is something called authority. Do you command the stage? Do you control the stage? Or do you appear to be distracted? Or do you appear to be, weak, if you will? So again, don't listen to yourself. This time, no sound, just watch yourself. And again, we're watching for authority. The third time, watch yourself either fast forward or fast reverse. It really doesn't matter. What we're looking for here are distracting gestures. So for example, I used to coach this executive, and for whatever reason, he used to pat his thighs when he was speaking. And I'm thinking why do you do that? He says, what do I do what? I said, okay, let's go to the video. And I showed him, and he looked like this. He never did it again. Video shows you any distracting gestures. For example, if you have a tendency to pace back and forth, if you speed up the video, guess what? You'll look like a duck in a shooting gallery. It's a way of isolating distracting gestures. Finally, watch your speech, regular speed, regular sound. By watching yourself these 4 different ways, literally after the 4th viewing, you would have dramatically increased your presentation ability.
Other than presentation skills, what do you think the important skills that people should know, but they are not taught in schools?
Ooh, well, here in America, definitely finance is one of them. So that's beyond the scope of this particular talk. The debt is definitely crazy. But another skill is influence. How can you influence others? How can you socialize? So the one thing I found startling, for example, working with Johnson & Johnson and Hallmark Cards and all these companies where they year after year after year, they would have these young people to come to work for their organizations. Not everyone, but I'm going to say a high percentage, let's call it a third of the individuals are so used to communicating on these, they can't have a regular conversation. I'm working with a company right now, design firm out of Taiwan. and their young people cannot communicate with CEOs and executives. They're hiring me, and I'm gonna charge them a lot of money. I'm gonna charge them north of 6 figures to train these young people to be able to communicate and hold a conversation with an executive. They are so dependent upon these, they can't hold regular conversations. And to me, that's crisis. And that it's not just in the USA, this is global. And again, it's not everyone. I can't make this statement about everyone. However, if I were to continue to work in corporate America today, I would never be unemployed. I could train incoming young people on how to talk to people for the rest of my life and never be out of a job, because that's how prevalent this problem is.
Well, talking about the dependency on the software and the tools, now that we have been forced to use software and computers and mobile phones to do the communication, how do the skills that are required have changed now in this current scenario in COVID?
Oh man, first of all, virtual is different. It is definitely, I mean, for example, like right now, I've done 10 virtual keynotes since the beginning of the year. So now I've actually trained myself to actually look at the camera as opposed to looking at AJ. So when I'm looking at AJ, it looks like I'm not looking at AJ because I'm looking at the screen. So in order for me to look at AJ, I've got to watch the camera. That's weird. That's unusual. So that's weirdness number one. Weirdness number two is I'm talking in a room by myself. Okay, I'm used to getting feedback. When I do a virtual keynote, we have to turn off the sound. So I'm not getting the feedback. I'm not, typically I get laughs, like right now I would have got several laughs, like AJ, you're a really tough audience, man. And so like humor is a lot more difficult. So we have to train ourselves how to do these things. The other thing is that I'm sitting down. Normally I don't sit down when I do presentations like this. Whenever I'm talking to someone, I like to stand up because naturally your energy is higher. However, these are learnable skills. These are skills that we can get better at. I will say this, if you have a bad presentation that's live, it is 10 times worse online. It is 10 times worse online. So you've got to get better. And by the way, planet Earth was forced to be in quarantine. Planet Earth was forced to be on platforms like Zoom and go-to meetings and you name the platform, which is out there, like Microsoft Teams. We're always going to be on these types of platforms from now on. We may get back to live, but it's always going to be a blended solution. And again, planet Earth was forced to go this way, and they're never going to go back.
Okay, so now that planet Earth has forced you to do this, there might be a lot of people impacted. I just asked this random question do you have any advice to the people who are struggling in current COVID environment, if their life has been impacted by this?
Okay, so first of all, my thoughts and prayers goes out to those of you who've been impacted by COVID-19. These are horrible circumstances, and there's no way to sugarcoat that whatsoever. The other thing I will say about this is that we are going to make it through this. I know it doesn't seem like that now. I know some of you may have lost jobs. Some of you may have health issues, but we're going to get through this. In my career, here in the United States, we had 9/11. So I just started my speaking career in the year 2000. I left my high-paying 6-figure job, to pursue a job as an entrepreneur. And then, less than a year later, we had this tragedy, which is 9/11. And the entire speaking industry shut down. I was fortunate enough to make it through those circumstances. The year 2007, 2008, we had the worldwide global crisis. And again, I was fortunate enough to make it through those circumstances. And the lesson is this, and it seems like we're having these bad circumstances almost every decade, if you do the math here. However, you will make it through this. You've made it through 100% of your worst days. And I submit to you, you will continue to do so.
Thank you for that great advice, Ed. So finally, where can people reach you?
Very simple, edtate.com, edtate.com. I'm on social media, Don't look at my Instagram too hard because that's brand new. My daughter, who's one, actually has more Instagram followers than I do. So, but you can follow me on Facebook. I'm definitely LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn guy. So if you really want to get a hold of me at LinkedIn. But edtate.com, edtate.com.
Okay, I'm also learning Instagram, by the way. That's the only platform where I don't exist, literally. But I've heard that you need to learn it because it's upcoming and there's a lot of people in business also using Instagram nowadays.
Absolutely, absolutely. So,
okay, thank you very much, Ed. This was really a pleasure talking to you and learning a lot about yourself and what you have to give away. Thanks a lot for that. So guys, if you want more such content, then please do subscribe to my channel by clicking on the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so that you get notification for every new video. You can reach Ed on the website and the LinkedIn he has told, and I'm going to put all of that information in the description below. I will put his books as well in there. Just in case you want to explore, please feel free to do so. Thank you very much, Ed. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, AJ. Appreciate it. I really enjoyed being on your show.